Alright, same thing we talked about in the TVT. I wish I gotta try talking quieter so I don't lose my voice. But it's hard because there's a loud background. Anyway. Marines, the way Marines work. Best unit statistically in the game, dollar for dollar. Pound for pound, as they would say. But they have two big weaknesses. First, they're very susceptible to AoE because they're tiny and they clump up. And they're ranged, so they stand still. Clump up, stand still, die to AoE. No big deal. You understand this weakness. Second big weakness, which you do not seem to understand, is that they're very bad supply for supply. So there's two ways to measure the value of a unit. You can measure it versus dollars, in which case Marines win. You can measure it versus supply, in which case Marines lose. They're just as bad as Langs and Roaches and Zealots. So when you play with Marines, you can get, let's show this, a 200 unit space army. Come on, 202. That is only $5,600. Isn't that ridiculous? Let's fast forward to the end of the game and see how big his 200U army is. Okay, right now, this isn't even 200U. 78 unit space army, $11,000. This is about double the size of your maxed army, and this isn't even a maxed army. Do you see the problem? Marines are only good as long as you're fighting against somebody and forcing the fight to be all about the money. All about the money. That means trading constantly so that your income and his income are being matched against each other. You each get $1,000 this minute, and then everything you built this minute has to fight or you will lose. And then you each get $1,000 next minute, and everything you built that minute has to fight or you will lose. That's how Marines are good, right? You force him to spend money and then immediately fight with it, so that he's fighting off of his last reinforcement cycle. Marines will win you the game that way as long as your income is even slightly higher than his, or even just even with his. If you have even an even income with a Zerg, and you force him to constantly fight Marines versus non-Marines, and you never let him get really good splashes on clumped up units like this, you should be able to win pretty easily. When you will lose is if you ever have there be a gap of more than 2 minutes between fights. If you go 2 minutes without fighting, you're gonna lose. And that's a daunting prerequisite to this style. It might even make it so that the whole concept of a Marine-based style is out of your reach, right? If you're incapable of fighting so often, you know, grabbing everything you have and going, grabbing everything you have and going, grabbing everything you have and going, splitting when you fight, and reinforcing all the time. So this is the primary detriment of Marines, right? We said two things. First, your army value is going to be very small. So right now he's got more than double your army size, despite him not being maxed. And then the other one is that they die really heavily to AoE. So he went basically pure AoE. He goes Baneling, Fungal, nothing else. So he countered your Marines by going only AoE, and he countered your Marines. Well, he didn't so much counter it as you countered yourself by delaying the fight and delaying the fight and delaying the fight and delaying the fight until his army was huge. So in this case, I've said every game of StarCraft basically comes down to the army size at the point of the primary engagement, unless you do something silly like not spreading out versus Banelings and Infestors, which you actually did in this case. Then it's all going to come down to who has the bigger army. So in this case, he had the bigger army and he spread out. So usually the way to get a bigger army at the point of engagement is to get really good at your opening and to get really good at making a big army, like getting a 200 unit space army by 13.5 minutes, for example. Right? that's usually the way to have the bigger army, because most people will attack you before the 13-minute mark, and then they're going to come to your base, and you're just going to have a bigger army than them because you're so good at that early game. But sometimes, if you don't attack, it doesn't matter how big your army was in the early game. You know, if we're 6 minutes past the early game now, then who cares how much of a lead you had? You know, it's like you have to attack, or else this whole lead is just wasted, and then you're down to, you know, just army versus army later on. When you both have 20k in the bank, who cares if you have 20k and he has 10k? Neither one of you can spend all that money, so he's going to win. So, you're playing with fire, man. Never make Marines and then max out. If you make Marines, you're not allowed to max out. That's the rule. Don't do it anymore. Look at this right here. 177 supply to 115. You know, anyway, you got a big lead and then you blew it by not attacking him. Don't do that anymore.